I have read quite a bit of complaints and lawsuits filed against Trump in these past 100 days, but there is no complaint I have enjoyed reading more than this one. It involves Stephen Miller's America First Legal Foundation, and they are suing none other than Chief Justice of the Supreme Court because they think that the courts need to be overseen by, yes, the White House. My name is Dina Doll with the MeidasTouch Network. Let's break this down. Yes, it was laughable, and I will read from this complaint, but Stephen Miller and his legal foundation is out there now on record in a public court filing, suing Chief Justice Roberts of the Supreme Court because he is the head of the Judiciary office, and they are also suing the head of the administrative office, Robert Conrad. Both of these positions basically oversee the administrative function of the courts. Because as we know, the courts in their day-to-day, let's say, responsibilities are overseeing lawsuits, overseeing criminal trials, etc. So there are two different other departments, let's say, that oversee like how the courts function. And they act as liaisons between the court and Congress because the courts need to be funded. They need to be able to have certain input on policy that Congress makes that have to do with the courts. So there's two different entities, let's say. One is this judicial conference, and the head of the judicial conference is always the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. Right now, that is John Roberts. And they are in charge. The Judicial Conference is in charge in, again, setting any kind of like input on policy regarding the courts, communicating with the Congress about maybe what kind of budget they might need in order to function, kind of the more administrative day-to-day functioning, being able to communicate with the other co-equal branch of government. And then the head of the judicial conference, in this case, again, Chief Justice Roberts, always appoints the head of the administrative office, which does the actual implementing of when they do receive the money from the budget, how that gets administered, kind of the more, I guess, administrative functions of the court, let's say. So Stephen Miller, this is what happens. And this is kind of his basis is the Freedom of Information Act. That's like what this complaint is actually centered on. But really, the bigger takeaway of the complaint is that he believes the courts should be governed by the executive branch, by Trump. And he says this to Chief Justice Roberts' face in a public complaint. And that's the part that is so laughable because I can only imagine what Chief Justice Roberts thinks about having his courts overseen by Trump. If you remember, they didn't even, Congress, when they were trying to oversee the ethical violations of the courts, invited Chief Justice Roberts to speak to Congress, and he declined. They didn't even try to issue a subpoena because of this idea of separation of our co-equal branches of government, whether or not they even could have enforced a subpoena against him. So for Chief Justice Roberts, who wouldn't even go to a hearing to Congress because he felt like as the head of our court system, he didn't have to. Imagine what he must think of this idea that his court system should not be run by him, but by somebody Trump appoints. But Stephen Miller, he doesn't mince any words here. It's exactly what he says in his complaint. And before I get into the details of what he says in his complaint, the backdrop of this is what Stephen Miller's foundation is saying is that they tried to have a freedom of information request around Senator Sheldon's communications with the staff, with the judicial conference staff, with the administration office staff related to the ethical violations of Justice Alito and Justice Thomas. As we know, Senator Sheldon has been a very strong proponent of ethical standards in our Supreme Court, and he along with ProPublica have really, over these past recent years have really shown a light on the ethical violations happening at the court. So this foundation issued a Freedom of Information Act. They wanted to know the communications, if any, between the senator and the office declined because the Freedom of Information Act only applies to the executive branch. Doesn't apply to Congress, and it doesn't apply to the courts. So his legal foundation, Stephen Miller's legal foundation, the far-right extremist who is essentially running the government and creating policies and going on press conferences saying the most insane things, is in court saying that because of the denial of the Freedom of Information Act was wrong, because the Judicial Conference, he is saying, should be and is an executive agency, and therefore Trump has the power to appoint that executive agency. That's his kind of, let's say, argument for why Trump should control the courts, is that this is an executive agency. He's using this Freedom of Information denial as like a way in to make the larger point that our court system should be controlled by Trump. And this is all coming in the backdrop of all the things we've been hearing from Trump, from J.D. Vance, from others that are upset that the judges are ruling against Trump. The posts Trump is making. I mean, we're seeing, if you've been following along Meidas, you've been seeing in real time all the attacks against judges. So Stephen Miller making this argument to Roberts in the middle of the attacks. We all know what is happening here. And the reason why, for me, it was just laughable reading this is because, as we know, the Supreme Court kind of helped create Trump, right? They allowed him to have immunity over any Article 2 exercise of powers. He's only had qualified immunity with the rest of his executive functions. But the fact is, all the Heritage Foundation appointed Supreme Court justices believe in this executive unitary theory of the courts, which is a more expansive view of the power of the executive. They're all believers, like true believers in this. The Heritage Foundation, which holds now a majority of the court. Did you know that by the time summer starts, your skin's already in defense mode? Think about it. Sun exposure, chlorine, dry hair from air conditioning. They all wear down your skin barrier, leaving your complexion dull, dehydrated, and more sensitive. Today's sponsor, OneSkin, has everything you need to keep your skin healthy, hydrated, and strong all summer long. Their secret, a proprietary peptide called OS1. It's the first peptide scientifically proven to reduce the damaged cells that weaken your skin barrier and accelerate aging. Their moisturizers and sunscreens don't just treat dry skin and irritation on the surface. They go deeper, helping restore your skin's health at the cellular level. And honestly, this is the perfect time to reset before all of summer's skin stressors really kick in. The right moisturizer and SPF can make all the difference. Try OneSkin with 15% off your first order. Use code MISTRIAL at oneskin.co. I use the OneSkin moisturizer every day under my makeup before I record. I love how moisturized it makes my skin, as well as it's a perfect moisturizer to use before makeup. I've really been enjoying using this ever since I was introduced to this product. Now, OneSkin is the world's first skin longevity company. By focusing on the cellular aspects of aging, OneSkin keeps your skin looking and acting younger for longer. For a limited time, you can try OneSkin with 15% off using code MISTRIAL at oneskin.co. That's 15% off oneskin.co with code MISTRIAL. After you purchase, they'll ask you where you heard about them. Please support our show. Tell them we sent you. Give your skin scientifically proven gentle care it deserves with OneSkin. Well, this is what happens when you believe an expansive executive theory. It comes back to bite you too. And that is what was so satisfying, because the rest of us are really tired of the idea of Trump having this expansive authority. We're really tired of this idea that he can cut funding to research science, and he can cut, people's jobs at a moment's notice, and no due process, and deporting people with no due process. Well, the executive expansive theory is also going to eliminate you, Chief Justice Roberts. So here's some of the things in the complaints that Stephen Miller's group has the audacity to say to his face, to Chief Justice Roberts' face. The Judicial Conference's duties are executive functions and must be supervised by executive officers who are appointed and accountable to other executive officers. Basically, again, you are not going to be independent. That's the whole thing. And later in the complaint, the presiding officer, right now, the presiding officer, again, is the Chief Justice, so it's John Roberts. The presiding officer of the Judicial Conference is a principal officer and is required to be presidentially appointed. They want Trump to be the one who appoints the head of the Judicial Conference, which oversees our entire court system. It goes on to say, the power to further appoint other executive officers of its subsidiary agency, the administrative office, reaffirms this fact. This is where they are going. And for this to be happening right now is actually really good for the rest of us, because there are a lot of cases coming up right now to the Supreme Court. A lot of them having to deal with Trump's violation of the Administrative Procedures Act, having to do with firing people in agencies. And we've been covering all of this on MeidasTouch. There's a ton of lawsuits that are still coming up to the Supreme Court. And they may want to have given the president more expansive power, but they are having to decide whether or not it is right to give it to this president. And when they get a complaint like that, when they know how close Stephen Miller is to Trump, and they know how far Trump is willing to take this expansive view of the executive branch, to even take it as far to oversee the courts, that may just make them rule in a way that helps us and is against their own maybe internal belief of the expansive executive authority. This is why it was so satisfying to read this complaint. My name is Dina Doll with the MeidasTouch Network. Be sure to free subscribe. I'll update you on this and any other of the many developments that are coming out of the Trump administration.
Love this video? Continue the conversation by following us on Instagram @MeidasTouch and help us blow past 1 million followers.